My biological mother gave me up for adoption after Dad died and had an affair with my uncle. Years later, she found me online pretending to reconnect. My mother recently got in touch with me, a 17-year-old girl, after we hadn't spoken for 10 years. When I was 7 years old, she placed me for adoption, and happily, I was able to locate a family that would adopt me. I will refer to my biological mother as Julia and my adoptive parents as Mom and Dad for the sake of clarity when I describe what transpired. At the age of 20, Julia gave birth to me with my biological father. I was the reason she had to leave college. They were married shortly after my biological father's graduation from school. He was diagnosed with leukemia when I was about 3 years old, and he died not long after my 7th birthday. Since my mother gave me away and I moved in with my new family just one day after my dad's death, I suppose the process of relinquishing custody had already begun long before his death. Even though 10 years have gone by since then, I can still recall everything as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was really angry and perplexed by what was happening. Many people assured me that I would be all right, that my father was in a better place, and so on, but all I wanted was to check on him. Even though he had been quite ill, he was always available when I wanted to visit him. But after Dad died, I was not even permitted to bid him farewell. When my new family arrived the day after my dad's death, I had hardly had time to register and process these things. According to my mother, these individuals would look after me for a few days, but those days quickly grew into weeks, months, and years. I continued to wait for my mom to get in touch with me. At first, I recall crying a lot about this because I felt like my mother and my family had deserted me. My biological grandparents visited me a few weeks after my parents took me in, and they have remained in contact with me ever since. I was too young to hear the truth at the time. However, they were no longer able to avoid my questions when I was about 14. Since I was well aware that I was adopted, I simply wanted to know what had occurred with my birth mother. I clearly recall getting along with my birth parents when I was younger, so I was just curious as to why all of this had occurred. Eventually, I learned the truth from my parents and grandparents. It seems that my mother was distraught to learn that my biological father had leukemia. However, she began an affair with my uncle rather than supporting him. Even while that was terrible in and of itself, no one was aware of it until 6 months prior to my dad's passing. At that point, my father's health had begun to deteriorate significantly, and Julia knew she wanted to be with my uncle as soon as my father was gone. So they decided there was no use in continuing to hide their romance. My uncle and Julia discussed it with their parents. Despite their clear revulsion at what was happening, my grandparents remained silent about it out of concern for my ailing father. They didn't want my father, who was already dealing with a lot, to learn about any of this, and I was too little to comprehend. My uncle and Julia also declared that they were not wanting to raise me and were thinking of placing me for adoption about the same time they told my grandparents about the affair. Despite all of the commotion, Julia was quite clear about what she wanted. She apparently claimed that she didn't even want to be a mother and that she had been far too young when she gave birth to me. Her parents urging that she keep me and marry my father was the only reason she felt ready at the time. Her life would have been quite different, and she probably wouldn't have done either of those things if her parents hadn't put pressure on her. She didn't want me either, and she was going to place me for adoption since my father would no longer be involved. They waited until my father died, since it was clear that they could not send me away while he was still living. They then gave my parents permission to finally take me in. My predicament astonished even my adoptive parents, but they were only interested in adopting a kid to complete their family. They had been having trouble becoming pregnant again after their first pregnancy, and it was too risky for my mom anyhow. My parents informed me they hadn't heard about me from any adoption agencies. Even though I know they likely wanted to adopt a much younger child, it was actually one of my mom's cousins who informed her of my predicament, since she was formerly acquainted with Julia. They realized they had to get me out as soon as they learned about me. They spoke to my mother face to face without the involvement of any agency, and they didn't even give a damn about my age. Even my mother was having trouble finding a willing adopter for a 7-year-old through the agency, so she consented to let them adopt me. 4 months prior to my dad's death, they had a conversation with Julia, and everything was settled a few weeks prior to his passing. Even my parents had assumed that I would likely be staying with Julia for a few days at the very least after my father's death, but she sent me out the very next day. I was quite happy that Julia had chosen to place me for adoption after I learned the reality. People typically choose younger children when adopting. Therefore, I was fortunate to find such amazing parents. I discovered a truly amazing family. I couldn't be happier because I adore my parents and older brother. Additionally, I have 4 sets of grandparents, so you can only imagine how pampered I've been. After my dad died, no one stayed in contact with my uncle or Julia from my early years. My grandparents had planned his funeral, but they weren't even present. I wasn't there because I was already going through a really perplexing time, and it was a very serious scenario. They believed it would be best for me to get used to my new existence. I expected to feel unwelcome or at least a little sad after learning the truth about why I had been placed for adoption and why Julia had left my life. However, I was primarily relieved that I had met parents who genuinely wanted me and had avoided living with my biological mother. Now that I'm 17 and will be attending college in a few months, I seldom ever give Julia or my uncle or their activities a second thought. But because Julia contacted me on Instagram to ask if I would be open to meeting with her and making amends, I have been thinking about them nonstop for the past several days. It's clearly easy to find me because I have a public account, but I didn't understand why she was contacting me after all these years. I therefore made the decision to find out why she suddenly wanted to patch things up with me before I consented to anything. In a lengthy and sincere message, she expressed her regret for letting go of me and choosing to focus on her life with my uncle rather than her role as a mother. Even though a lot of time had gone, she wanted me to know that she was not totally incorrect. Even though she acknowledged that it was not her position to insist that I return to her as her daughter, she asserted that her sole error was taking on too much at an early age before fully comprehending the consequences. She was under a lot of strain, which caused her to make numerous poor choices. Despite what my family may have told me, Mom maintained that she never regretted having me. She wanted to make amends with me since she simply wasn't prepared to become a mother. I was fascinated, so after giving it some thought, I chose to say yes. I simply went ahead and met her without telling my parents or grandparents. It wasn't until I met her that I realized she needed my assistance and wasn't only seeking a meeting to patch things up. I should have recognized it sooner, but regrettably, I tend to strive to find the positive aspects of everyone, including Julia. She seemed so friendly and pleasant when we first met for lunch 2 days ago. She attempted to give me her version of events, claiming that her parents had forced her to take care of me, marry my father, and leave college. She simply wasn't prepared for any of it, but she felt pressured by her parents to conform. The news of her husband's condition was the final straw for her to have an affair after she started to feel smothered in her marriage. She claimed that because she thought my uncle was the love of her life, she didn't regret having the affair. She has been happily married to him for the past 8 years and was happy to find him. She broke down in tears as she spoke about my uncle, telling me that part of the reason she had come to me was because their marriage was now in peril. She required my assistance in making amends with both her parents and my father's parents. They cut her off for the past 10 years and didn't want anything to do with her or my uncle after she secretly placed me for adoption. In the past, Julia and my uncle had been okay with this distance. But lately, my uncle had begun to argue with her because he wanted to make up with his parents after everything that had transpired. He was aware that they would never accept him back. For some reason, he was blaming Julia, thinking that things wouldn't have turned out so badly if she had waited a little longer and not given up on me so quickly. Her only option was to have me speak with my grandparents and persuade them to make amends with her and my uncle. Then perhaps, she reasoned, she could prevent her marriage from disintegrating. She clarified that she and my uncle had been having a lot of arguments over the last few weeks, and that this was the only solution she could think of. To be honest, I regret going to meet that woman more than anything else in my life. As she said, she was obviously not present to truly apologize, provide an explanation, or simply make apologies. She was only there because she believed I could help her with her marital problems. I doubt I would want to assist her even if I could, given how self-centered she has been. She doesn't deserve my assistance. I listened to her and informed her that I couldn't be moved by her crocodile tears. As I was about to go, she added that I would have had a greater understanding of her predicament if I had been in her shoes. She said she did her best to be a good mother to me, but she felt compelled to become a mother before she was ready. I was no different from the others if I was unable to recognize that because I had been brainwashed by my family. I was pretty irritated by that. Even though she had only been my mother for 6 or 7 years, she had all the support in the world. I was certain that my grandparents had not advised her to leave college. It was her own decision. My mother had decided to have me. They had often informed me they had simply told her to have me and see where it went, without pressing. She took their counsel as coercion, and if I had to choose who I would trust, I would choose my grandparents. I advised her to find another place to sell her baloney. I didn't believe it. I also informed her that I didn't trust a word she said. She cheapened her apologies by attempting to persuade me to restore her relationship without attempting to mend it herself. Even though I had been prepared to offer her an opportunity to be truthful and make amends, I told her that since we weren't dating, I wasn't required to help her in any way. I may have been born to her, but my mother, not her, reared me. After that, I left the restaurant and returned home. I discovered she had texted me after I came home. She was crying in the voice note. The background sounds indicated that she was still in the restaurant. I felt a little bad about that because it takes a lot of heartbreak to cry that much in public. She was crying and claiming that it was terrible of me to declare that we had no relationship in the voice message. She said that I was her biological daughter and that she would always be my biological mother, despite everything. Mom still thought of me as her daughter. However, I'm not sure what to say to her. I simply no longer think of her as my mother, and I don't want to feel guilty about it. For the last 10 years, she has not been my mother. She was crying on the phone, and that makes me feel messy and conflicted. However, I still can't bring myself to block her. She is a human person who shared a bond with me, even though I don't consider her to be my mother. Edit. Hello. I haven't told my family about meeting Julia, even though I believed it was obvious in my post. I didn't notify them in advance since I don't think they would support my choice. I intended to make this choice on my own for the time being, but I know I owe it to them, and I will tell them. They all despise her, and with good reason, so I knew that if I informed them, they wouldn't have allowed me to meet her. I'm positive of that. I suppose the only reason I went to see her in the first place was to get closure. I had no idea what to anticipate. I wanted to speak with her one final time, and I knew she would apologize. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly since her reaching out evoked a lot of conflicting feelings in me. In any event, I met her, and it's over now. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't alter my choice. I found the closure I needed. I have no regrets about what I did. Sometimes you have to put everyone else aside and follow your instincts, even if they are incorrect. First update. At last, I informed my family that I had met Julia. They were quite unhappy about it, as was to be expected. She started sending me texts and calls requesting that I talk to her again and give her an opportunity to explain herself. I blocked her a few days ago, after we met last week. I had no idea what she would say to me, but I no longer wanted to find out. All I needed from her was closure, which I received after our one encounter. She only required my assistance. It's not like she really wanted to talk to me and put things right after our altercation at the restaurant. I'm very certain that's the only reason she got in touch with me. I knew it was time to tell my family about our encounter, and I didn't want to talk to her again. I therefore sat down with my parents and all of my grandparents today and gave them an explanation of everything. My parents were furious that I had left without telling them who I was meeting and that I hadn't talked to them about it. However, they appeared to comprehend. My grandparents were the ones who were furious with me. I quietly listened to their frequent reprimands because I earned them. I ought to have consulted them first. They were most concerned that, given my mother's propensity for manipulation, she might have attempted to brainwash me or paint them as the bad guys. When they were finished, I told them that I had just met her to get closure. I felt compelled to explain my reasoning, even though I didn't expect everyone to grasp it right now. I just expressed regret for doing it behind their backs. Everyone seemed to be placated when I vowed never to be untruthful with them again. After that, we talked about Julia's motivation for contacting us and her remarks regarding my uncle's desire to make amends with his parents. We all agreed that the matter was more complicated than she was making it out to be. They were probably in difficulty and in need of assistance if she was attempting to coerce me into assisting her in getting back in touch with the family. On the phone and in person, Julia had been truly distraught and had said that her marriage was in peril. My uncle was upset with her, and my grandparents thought she was probably speaking the truth. We chose not to get involved since it wasn't our place, regardless of the truth. The day Julia and my uncle declared their relationship, while my father was still unwell, my grandparents made it clear that they no longer regarded them as family. When Julia gave me away without even talking to them or giving me an explanation, it was the last straw. They were just fortunate that my grandparents were permitted to stay in my life by my adoptive parents. In any case, Julia is now blocked by me. I will never speak to her again, no matter what. She has been frantically attempting to get in touch with me, messaging me about how her life and marriage are failing and how much she needs me. I feel bad for not paying attention to her. But really, what does she expect me to do? I couldn't persuade her in-laws or my grandparents to get back together even if I wanted to assist. I wouldn't want to talk to her either if I were in their shoes. It's quite reasonable for me to break up contact with her at this time. She may make other accounts in an attempt to get in touch with me, but I know that won't work. I'll let her know I'm not interested if she makes another attempt. I will report her if she continues to annoy me. I heard my grandparents discussing possible reasons for my uncle's desire to make amends. They said it might be money problems. We have no idea what they have been up to because no one in the family has been in contact with them. We are aware that they still reside in the same city, but that is all we know. In the past, Julia was a stay-at-home mother, but who knows now? It just serves to highlight how heinous their actions are if my grandparents are correct and Julia and my uncle are attempting to get back together due to financial difficulties. Making contact with a daughter they left behind 10 years ago in order to make amends with their parents in exchange for money? That is among the lowest things in the world. I hope they receive what they are due if that is indeed the case. Second update. Today, Julia contacted me once more. About 10 days ago, I blocked her everywhere. I assumed she had given up after a week of not communicating with me. However, she was able to discover my school's address somehow. I suppose this is the reason we shouldn't post our private information on open sites. The hard way was the lesson learned. Anyway, she appeared out of nowhere today as I was making my way home from school on foot. It took place around 1 block from the school. I typically walk home because I live nearby. She began shouting for me to get into her car as soon as it drew up. I didn't trust her, so I told her I wouldn't be letting her in. I told her that if she attempted to cause trouble, I would yell in the middle of the road, and she would be dealt with. She replied that she only wanted to communicate and wasn't here to argue or upset me. She stated that she only wanted to make amends with me and didn't care if I didn't assist her in making amends with her parents. She insisted that she wanted to make amends because our last encounter had gone badly. She claimed that although she was aware that I would believe her statements were false, she sincerely wanted to make amends. Although I could hear the desperation in her voice, I was irritated rather than sorry. I informed her that I didn't want anything to do with her and that she should leave me alone. Her true colors came out once more at that point. She was quite excellent at acting regretfully, so I'm actually proud of myself for not falling for her act the first time. She freaked out as soon as I instructed her to go. She began to curse at me, claiming that although she had made a concerted effort to be courteous, she would make sure to ruin my life if I continued to act in such a manner. She even said I had better guard my back as a threat. To be honest, I thought it was funny. How would she respond? She cursed at me as I continued to walk, and then she drove away yelling at me as she went. I told my folks about the incident when I arrived home. Everyone convened once more to decide what to do next. We were able to obtain a restraining order since she had threatened me. That was the best course of action, we all agreed. Update 3. My parents requested a restraining order against Julia a few days ago. My uncle finally contacted his folks after she was served. It had to do with money, as we suspected. They have been operating a confectionery for a few years, but it hasn't been doing well. It turns out they realized that contacting them personally would not help their financial situation. They created this entire act for that reason. Sadly for them, Julia blew it after losing patience. Now, I would be the happiest person alive if they got divorced over this. As their only son, my uncle is attempting to appease his parents by saying he had nothing to do with Julia's actions and is entitled to financial support. Julia, however, has adopted a hostile stance. She has been disparaging us online without considering the repercussions. All that does is strengthen our argument. She is obviously unstable. Therefore, we are certain that we will obtain the restraining order. She made it plain the other day that she doesn't want anything to do with me, so I'm not really sure why she's resisting it. Since I'm heading off to college in the autumn, it doesn't really matter. She's struggling financially, so I doubt she'll be there. I'm not worried because my parents and family will always be there for me.